Was George R.R. Martin's 2025 Meltdown justified? Not at all. So in part 1 of this video, we'll have a brief summary of George's now infamous 2025 rant. In part 2 of this video, we will discuss head-on why this rant was utterly delusional and thankless. And finally, in part 3 of this video, I will be delivering George R.R. Martin his sentencing, which will specify what George Martin needs to do in order to atone for this situation. So let's now jump into a never-before-heard dramatic reading of the George R.R. Martin statement that you've all read on your computer. It reads as follows.
You have given up on me, or on the book. I will never finish Winds. If I do, I will never finish A Dream of Spring. And if I do, it won't be any good. I ought to get some other writer to pinch hit for me. I'm gonna die soon anyway, because I'm so old. I lost all interest in A Song of Ice and Fire decades ago. I don't give a shit about writing any longer. I just sit around and spend my money. I edit the Wild Cards books too, but you hate Wild Cards. You may hate everything else I've ever written. The Hugo winners and Hugo losers, A Song for Laia and Dying of the Light, Sand Kings and...
Hey, no, I'm going to stop reading this right now because this has just turned into a laundry list of plugs for his other content that he's peddling. This rant itself seems to be just content to draw attention to the projects that are landing dead in the water for most of the Game of Thrones audience. At the end of this list of plugs, George R. Martin says,
You don't care about any of those. I know. You don't care about anything but Winds of Winter. You've told me so often enough.
So already, here we go in part 2 of this video, guys, why this rant is utterly delusional and narcissistic. So some people have risen to the defense of George R. Martin to say, George is not your bitch, he doesn't work for you, he's not your employee, blah, 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 leave him alone, he doesn't owe you anything. That's a take that's been circulated. On one level, you could say that George R. R. Martin is not technically a direct employee of the millions of people who bought his books and supported him throughout. But it would be fair to say that the idea that George R. R. Martin is able to participate and publish all these various diverse works outside of Game of Thrones, is it fair enough to say that that wide breadth of his body of work was actually made possible by the Game of Thrones support that he had with so many years of loyalty purchasing his books and keeping the story and hype alive? Now, you can find the take around on YouTube that A Song of Ice and Fire is the greatest fantasy story of all time. And if you look at the first trilogy of books, even taken on their own, it would still fit that title of GOAT. Greatest fantasy story ever. So let's now shine light on the other side of that. Why does George owe his readers the completed books? Which, that is my stance. He definitely owes his fans those completed books to conclude the series. Well, let's start with the entire bit that the main bumper sticker t-shirt slogan in all of the identity of Game of Thrones is, winter is coming. Guys, winter is coming. If winter never comes, and your entire buildup of your series is on the tension that winter is coming, we want to see how it shakes out. We want to see which heroes or villains are rewarded or punished for their differing philosophies and political strategy gambits. To say that the end of the series doesn't matter is preposterous. And for people to say that, hey, the first 3 books on their own are a masterpiece that we should be grateful for, well, it's kind of like the lead up to Christmas. When you're a kid, December has all this great hype, and it's a common enough sentiment that half the fun of Christmas is that build-up, that excitement, hope, and hype. Okay, so what if on December 23, after an entire month of advent calendars and Secret Santa preparation, whatever else, surprise announcement, Christmas is canceled. Now, would people be right to be upset about the suddenly canceled Christmas that was so discussed and hyped up? Would it be fair to reach out to those crying children and say, hey, come on, you got to be more grateful because even though Christmas is canceled, you're just going to now throw away all the good times you had along the build-up? Half of the enjoyment of Game of Thrones is looking at these high-stakes chess matches pan out and giving you these burning questions and mysteries that will one day be revealed when certain characters are punished or rewarded for their choices, for their identity. Guys, Daenerys Targaryen's whole storyline is just preparation because she wants to take back control. Now, I, Alex Yard, have watched the entire program Game of Thrones from start to finish, and one of the biggest criticisms I can level at it, which is the direct result of the contents of the book, is that most seasons of the show end with a hard reset. I never felt like things were progressing along. You can point at individual seasons that built up all this potential for change and development and progression, but then it's just a hard reset at the end of the season. The Lannisters remain in control for basically the entire run. What good is calling the game Game of Thrones and teasing all this political intrigue if the same monolithic family is basically going to maintain control throughout the entire story? Nothing happens or progresses. Season 3 has Robb Stark making a big bid for control until he doesn't, because at the end of Season 3, that entirely resets. Season 4 has Stannis Baratheon making a big bid for control until he doesn't. And then Season 4 resets. Guys, we are spinning our wheels. All that's happening is that Daenerys is building her army. The Lannister family's holding the throne throughout. So it should not be called Game of Thrones, but Game of Stasis. Now, I'm recording this live in the studio, and I got the audience on the other side of the plexiglass, and I can see their chats. Alex G777 says, Winterfell had more change in management than King's Landing had. Stark, Bolton, Snow, Stark. And so it began and ended with Stark. There's your stasis, people. Even if all those hard resets were really annoying and setbacky, hey, at least winter is coming, right? The massive rod that George R.R. Martin has administered himself by saying winter is coming over and over for the past 30 years, right? It'll all be worth the wait. We will see the consequences of everything when winter finally arrives and stays for the long haul. George R.R. Martin owes his fans winter. He said it was coming. And when you look at what George has actually ended up doing, it's like Kamala Harris barged into his office and said to the winter, do not come. Do not come. The reason why George R.R. Martin owes his fans the remaining books and why it is inappropriate that he would balk on the deal is because George himself told his fans that he will kill many more important characters. He was quoted as saying, I do need to kill a lot more of my point of view characters, because there have gotten to be an awful lot of them, so which ones will die? Well, you'll just have to keep reading and find out. He has to follow through and kill those characters because he said he would, and by saying he would, he was building up further faith in his fan base that we're going to keep supporting him in his projects to get him more money under the contract of an eventual payoff, a reward for patience. The idea that characters dying wouldn't be because he has a good story to tell, but rather that his story has grown bloated out of control with way too many characters with their individual point of view. He is revealing in that moment that the story and narrative has become an utter mess, and so characters dying is not to tell a cool story, but just to tidy up a messy one. George R.R. Martin owes the remaining books because in the year 2015, he told fans he thought he could finish Winds of Winter by October 2015. Guys, that's 10 years ago. It's 2025 right now. Now, when George did not deliver on that October 2015 projected deadline, what he said as an explanation was his own navel-gazing inner monologue. He was like, oh, well, I didn't follow through on the deadline because I went east for my nephew's wedding. Everyone's got nephews, bro. Everyone's got cousins by the dozens. Weddings are a thing. Those are all factored into just basic real life as a professional public figure. George could also not resist mentioning that, also I had an appearance with the Staten Island Direwolves. This is not a AAA minor league baseball team, but a single A minor league baseball team that was doing some special cross promotion where they changed the name of the team to the Direwolves. I think that's some kind of species in Game of Thrones or whatever. So for George to have the nerve to say, Oh no, it was out of my hands. I was tied up doing this single A minor league baseball team promotional bit where I was honored at a stadium. Right? He's saying all these things out loud. These are all behind the scenes personal laziness, indulgence, not relevant points of information to explain why he did not meet the very tackleable deadline that he outlined. And you guys may remember that the 2016 season of Game of Thrones, George R.R. Martin did not write any episodes for that season because he wanted to make sure he had enough time to finish Winds of Winter, which is, again, an indication that the bulk of what needed to be done with Winds of Winter could very feasibly have been accomplished in the mid-2010s. George chose not to. So for George to now, in 2025, read his audience the riot act and berate them because they didn't show up for his other projects. George is basically lashing out at his fans to say, hey, you used me for Game of Thrones, and you left me out to dry with all these other projects. And it's like, some of George's other projects are just George nepotizing his close friends' works. Do you think I have any interest in watching any sort of product by something that has only made it to the mainstream because a powerful industry figure waved his cash wand and brought it into existence by cutting the line? Those projects do not exist on the merit of what they offer. They exist on the merit of being created someone who's in cahoots with George. So in fact, George used his audience, brought them in the door with all this wonderful Game of Thrones mystery and intrigue, and then he just pulled the ladder up behind him to indulge in this project and that project and not seeing things through to their actual finale that was in many cases promised explicitly. So George, when you wrote a Game of Thrones book or you had an episode release party for each new episode of Game of Thrones, any success that you had in those instances involved a self-contained transaction. You supplied Game of Thrones, and there was demand for it. That does not entitle you to further demand from that very audience for all these other scatterbrained projects. And it doesn't matter that there's also fantasy involved, or winning or getting nominated for Hugo Awards. The most that you earned from each of those successful Game of Thrones transactions was the opportunity to market your side projects for free. Because you have so many eyeballs on you and your social media as the direct result of the Game of Thrones passion, one passive benefit that you enjoy is free impressions. Not free guaranteed purchases, but guaranteed no-cost marketing. If there is not a demand for the things that you are offering in your supply of offshoot projects, that is something that you need to do soul-searching about. When you get a girl's number but she never responds to your text, you conduct a post-game post-mortem. Take responsibility in the interest of self-improvement. And when you go on 3 dates with a lady and she doesn't want to go on a 4th, you can't now throw a big tantrum and say, hey, we had such a great time on those first 3 dates. I kind of feel like I'm putting myself out there and getting nothing in return to just be abandoned. Guys, you have to think of this as a supply and demand transactional equation of which there should be very little mystery or personal resentment. And this has brought us to part 3 of this video, where I will now be delivering George R.R. Martin his sentencing, which will specify what George needs to do in order to atone for this situation. So George, I hereby sentence you to review the situation surrounding Billy Eichner and the movie Bros, the gay romantic comedy that got good critic reviews but bombed. Check out these Billy Eichner quotes and listen to the way that he berates his audience because they didn't show up for his gay romance movie, lashing out at the public because they're supposedly homophobic. Because it doesn't matter if a given movie has a 100% critics rating. The team that made the TV show Arrested Development can tell you that it doesn't matter if you have the most high-quality, groundbreaking, perfect show ever made up to that point. That in itself does not guarantee demand or a sizable audience. That's an additional, separate factor that comes down to your responsibility, George, yours alone. Now, Clement J, the Let's Player, had a similar meltdown when, after years of Let's Plays of Sonic and Mega Man, he was absolutely flabbergasted, baffled, and offended that his YouTube audience would not also follow him anywhere to other long, lengthy, arduous Let's Plays of obscure PS2 games like Steambot Chronicles. So since George R.R. Martin has not yet learned that vital lesson in the cautionary tale of Clement J64 the Let's Player, I will continue weighing in on this topic for as many times that history continues to repeat itself shamefully. That's what you can expect from me, Alex Yard, here at 91.6 WAYZ, the Alex Yard Zone, terrestrial internet radio deep in the heart of Boston. I myself had a great deal of enjoyment, technically, watching Game of Thrones, the program. But it was only because my girlfriend at the time roped me into it. If not for her, it would have been a non-starter, but watching it with her was a very fun, enjoyable, memorable experience. And look, even if I have concerns about the overall plot conceit, or the profoundly uninteresting one-dimensional threat of the zombie walkers coming down from the north, because winter is coming, allegedly. That's what we were sold, at least until Kamala stepped in to say, do not come. Do not come. Winter. Jon Snow is such a likable character that I could not complain too much, because just hanging out with him in a slow burn, there was an appeal there. I would be the first to admit it. But when any given situation can just be Deus Ex Machina'd out of existence because this guy over here has some previously unannounced magical ability to get out of this jam, or Daenerys' army of dragons is going to inexplicably swoop in to save her from getting painted into a plot corner because, oh yeah, the dragons can kind of sense naturally when Daenerys is distressed. Look, Game of Thrones may have individual ingredients that can be appreciated, but for people to say this is some grand masterwork and one of the goats of all fantasy fiction, I think you're just getting a tad seduced by breasts and dragons, never before seen on the screen in the same content slice. The novelty has worn off. I could see very early on that the show is just one big stasis that reset itself at the end of each season, and when George R.R. Martin stole his own thunder by allowing the show to proceed past where the books had gone, thereby killing his buzz. And it's particularly devious that George says, hey, don't worry, although the show is going to reach the ending, and it is going to touch upon what the intended book ending series was going to be, George says not to worry, that will not kill your buzz, because when I do eventually do those final Game of Thrones books that culminate in the ending, there are going to be some differences in the book to the show. So look forward to that, guys. Winter is coming, and then winter never came. And George is somehow baffled that people are upset about the lack of winter coming. Snap out of it, George. And we could sit here and tell George to snap out of it. George has no incentive to snap out of it for the same reason that Valve and Gabe Newell have no incentive to release games. They are comfortably rolling around in their infinite mountains of cash, and so I can have fun giving George a hard time, but really this becomes a reality check to the viewing audience that votes with their wallet, votes these public figures into office, so to speak, on the throne of cultural relevance. Well, if you are getting seduced by these never-ending mystery intrigue plots that never actually deliver, you watch the first couple of seasons of Lost, all the warning signs are there. Take responsibility, viewers. Which I say that half-jokingly, but this is an occasion to gently advise viewers not to get seduced into placing unwarranted trust in a person with a thoroughly weak record of following through on the deal. Vote with your wallet, and more importantly, vote with your emotional hopes and dreams, the hype that you foster and participate in with the community. But Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon is such a massive enterprise that by this point, it's too big to fail. Just like Pokemon can't fail, even though they churn out unpolished, messy games, because it's just a big money machine. It's going to have guaranteed millions of purchases. So the very best that we can do in the meantime is promote awareness and critical thinking, sharing our thoughts to help vulnerable consumers detect the smelliest of bullcrap in all its forms. Good night, everybody!